Are you
I'm working. I'm working actually. Earlier, my senior marketing manager told me to have a private room for study for this session.
Oh, so you're still at work, but you have a private room.
Yes. Just for the learning hour only, and after this I go back outside.
Oh, okay. So you got promoted. Got a room. Very nice.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I guess we should get started. Because I think we have quite a bit to cover today. Okay, so let me share screen one. Hopefully you can see. Okay, let me drag this over here a little bit. Okay, hopefully you can see my Google page.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yep. All right. So let me organize that a little bit. Okay. All right. So okay. So Yuki, you are already recording, right?
Yeah, I'm started already.
Perfect. Okay. All right. So let's get started. So two things today. Spread and destructure. Those are newer syntax. I think they were introduced in ES6. Not 100% sure. It doesn't really matter, but those are newer syntax that is extremely popular. It's like the standard way to do JavaScript coding nowadays. And you will come across that a lot in your daily coding. So I'm not, like last week, I'm not going to talk about things that are way beyond Udemy. Because I think the most important thing for these 2 weeks at least is to make sure we grasp the idea, had a good understanding on the idea, how to use it. That is the most important. That would be my goal for these 2 weeks at least. All right, so first of all, let's talk about spread. So spread operation means the 3 dots, right? Like you're spreading things. And it can appear in multiple places. It can appear in function calls. It can appear in arrays and objects, right? So those are the 3, at least 3 of the places that we can use the spread operation. So let's start with function call, right? And let's say we want to make a very simple function that would just get the sum of 3 numbers, right? Simple example, like I have a numbers array with 3 numbers. And then I'm going to make a function using arrow function because that is, as we talked about last week, that is kind of like the standard way to do things. So the name of the function would be sum, just like declaring a variable. So sum equals something, right? Assignment. So remember, when we do arrow function, we have to use a bracket. We have to use this arrow, and then we have a curly braces here. That is the function body, right? So in this case, this function sum would take 3 arguments. Number 1, n1, n2, and n3, right? And very simple, it just console log the sum of it. That's all. n1 plus n2 plus n3, right? So if you call this function, you pass 3 numbers, it will give you the sum. So before we do anything else, let's test that out to make sure it's working. So if I call sum, and then 1 plus 2 plus 3 should be 6. We print 6. So the function is working, right? So now if I want to, if I don't want to pass the numbers like this, if I want to declare the numbers in an array, which is very possible in real life, right? Because in real life, if you have to pass a set of numbers to a function, usually those numbers are dynamic. You may fetch that from some backend API, some database, or from some user input. So you do not know those numbers. So there's no way you can call them. Well, there is a way, but usually you may not be able to call the function like this. You may be calling them and pass an array, for example. So let's say I want to pass the numbers. I want to use the numbers array as input, right, to the sum function. So here I have 3 elements, right? And I'm expecting 3 arguments. So it's a one-to-one. So it's straightforward. But in order to do that, we can use, one way to do that is to use the spread operation. So I call sum, and then I use the spread operation to spread the numbers array. So what this does is to spread the numbers array into the 3 entries. So it would be like these 3 entries here. Right? So I call sum, and then I spread the numbers array. It will pass 2, 4, and 6. So the effect would be the same as if I call sum, and then I pass 2, 4, 6. And that gives 12. So that is the most basic spread operation that you can use when making function calls. Right? Spread an array into one-to-one mapping to each argument. And of course, if you have more, if the array here has more numbers, right? Let's say I have a 10 here. Then what happens is that if I do the same thing, it will pass the first 3, right? Let's try that out and see if I'm correct. Some numbers. So it still gives 12, right? Sum of the first 3 numbers. So anything beyond the first 3 would be ignored because it would just try to do a one-to-one mapping to the arguments here. So anything beyond that would be ignored. Yeah, so that's spread in function calls. Very straightforward. Nothing fancy, just new syntax to keep in mind. Any questions? All right, so let's move on to spread in arrays. Spread in arrays is even more commonly used. So let's say this time I have another array. Let's just clear that for a moment. Array of names, and then I have 2 people, John and Kate, right? So I have 2 names. So remember some time back when we talked about array operations, we talked about things like splice, right? Slice, concat. So those are very useful array operations that allow you to concatenate arrays, get a chunk of array, and so on. So there is another way to do that. I think I kind of talked about that a little bit before, but let me make sure I cover that again today. So we can use the array spread operation to achieve this kind of splice, slice, concat operation. For example, if I want to, let's say I want to make a new array, I want to insert 2 more names to the names array here in sorted order. So here J appears before K, so this is sorted in ascending order by names. So if I want to insert 2 more names, let's say I want to add Dave and Lucas, and I want to maintain the order, right? So obviously Dave has to appear before John, and Lucas has to go after Kate. Yes. So Dave has to go before, and Lucas has to go after. Using array spread, first of all, we can define a new variable to hold the names, sort the names, right? And then it would be an array. So the first thing we can do is to spread the existing names array, right? So this ... names will spread this array and give you the John and Kate entries. So at this point, the sorted array would be exactly John and Kate, right? So let's try that. Sort the names John and Kate. Nothing different, right? Exactly the same. It's a shallow copy. It's a shallow copy of the names array. So shadow copy, meaning each entry in the sorted names is a reference, and the reference is a copy of the original one. So, sorry, I should say that better. So basically, each entry in the new array would be a copy of the original ones. So the original ones are string here, so it will make a copy. So John would be copied to a new string with the same value John, but it is a new string. Kate would be a new string, Kate in here. So they are a copy. So to demonstrate that thing, that concept, the concept of shadow copy, before we go into the splice and slice and so on, if I make changes, right? So sorted names one would be Kate, right? If I change that to another Kate, what happens would be the original names array should be unchanged, but the sorted names would have the second entry changed. And since it is a shadow copy, this assignment operation here will not affect the original one, right? So let's confirm that. All right, so names will still be John and the old Kate. Sorted names would be the new Kate, right? So that demonstrates that the new array here created using the array spread operation is a shallow copy. The reason why we say it is a shallow copy instead of a deep copy is because each entry is copied over. So if the entry itself happens to be an object, then the reference to the object would be copied. So there is a new reference that would be made, right? So, for example, I know I'm going maybe a little more complicated here, but just bear with me. So if I have an object array, so let's comment that all out for now. Oops, I'll come back to it later. So if I have an object array, and each array would be an object with a name, right? So I just use object to represent the names. And I can potentially add more property to each object, but for now, just the name. If I now create and then I spread the objects array, what happens is that each of this entry is an object. So it will basically create a new reference. The reference will be duplicated, or not duplicated, but copied to a new reference. But it will be pointing to the same object. So if I run this, John and Kate, right? So if I change the first entry to a new Kate, actually I'm wrong. What's wrong here? Oh, because the reference is copied over, so it would be pointing. Yeah. The reference is copied over. So, but the reference is pointing to the same object. It's not a deep copy, and that's the reason why if I make a change to the object's copy, it actually make the change using a new reference, but still pointing to the same object. That's why it would impact the original one. Yeah, that's what I want to say. If it is a deep copy, then if I make a change to the object's copy, it should not impact the original one if it is a deep copy. And there are many ways to make a deep copy. There are some open source like packages. I can show you one quickly here. One of them is called Lodash. If you search Lodash deep copy, this is one way to create a deep copy. You will basically walk the object and copy over all the values. So this Lodash dot clone deep would create a deep copy, complete copy or deep copy. So it goes deep into the value. So the one example that I did here, okay, is a shallow copy. That's why it will impact the original one. I hope that's not too confusing, but at least I want you to keep in mind the differences between a shallow copy and a deep copy. If the array objects are primitive types like strings and numbers, shallow copy is basically a deep copy. It have the same effect. It will not be polluting each other, will not interfere. But if the array entry is objects, right? Then shallow copy doesn't mean it is a true copy. It is just copy of the references, but they're still pointing to the same object. So the two copies will still interfere with each other if those are object array. So hopefully that helps. So going back to the original thing I want to talk about, spreading arrays. Okay, so here I created a shallow copy of names. So it will be the same, still John and Kate, right? But remember, we want to insert Dave and Lucas in order, right? So what we can do is to put Dave before, just like this, right? If I put Dave before, then daughter names will have Dave, John, and Kate. So this is inserted before the original entries. And similarly, if I want to put Lucas at the end, right? So as you can see, it is a very neat and simple, easy to read, easy to understand way to do this kind of splice, slice, concat operation in a single line, right? Because this spread operation will spread this array into entries so that you can put entries before and after and so on. And of course, you can also spread multiple arrays. If you have a names one and names two, and then you want to concatenate the two arrays, you can just spread the two. Something like this, right? Oops, too many dots here, 3 dots. The names one and names two, right? Assuming you have a names one and names two array, then you can spread these two, and then all the entries would be appearing in order, right? So that is the array spread. Any question? If not, just one more quick thing to mention around spreading in arrays. Another powerful feature of doing spread in arrays is that you can add conditions. You can conditionally add some values. And what I mean is that, let's say you have I think I may have mentioned this example before, but let me just do that again. If I have a fruits array with apple, banana, and then if it is summertime, then I would also have watermelon. Otherwise, I would just have apple and banana, right? So summer would be apple, banana, banana. I can never spell this word. And watermelon, not non-summer. Non-summer will be just apple and banana. Okay, so this is the requirement. So of course, you can use if else, right? There's nothing wrong with that, right? You can do like this, and then if is summer, right? Summary is summer, then I would I can push banana. I can push watermelon. Rather. This is perfectly fine. Nothing wrong, right? It will work. Of course, I need to define is summer. Right? So if I run this code, there's watermelon, right? But then if it is non-summer, it will just be apple and banana. So nothing wrong. So now there is a better way, or more concise way to do the same thing, which is basically inline this logic in here, right? So how can we do that, right? So first of all, you need to use, you need to do something like this. Is summer. If it is true, then I would like to make an array watermelon. Otherwise, it will be an empty array. So in both cases, I will return an array, either array with one entry or no entries, right? And then I can spread this whole thing. I can spread this whole thing in brackets. Because if I make an array with one entry and then I do the spread, it will return the entry so that I can concatenate watermelon into this one, right? If it is summer. Otherwise, I will spread an empty array which will basically have no effect. We call it a no op, right? No op is an operation that doesn't have any effect. So that would achieve the same result, right? So let's try that out. Summer falls. So this I would expect only apple and banana, right? Apple and banana only. But if it is true, if it is true, then it will have 3 fruits in here, right? So this is this is a pattern that is quite you may use that from time to time. Of course, if this is too complicated, then this may not be a very readable code. So this is not necessarily a good practice. It depends. So for very simple things like this, you can avoid having a whole if block just to do this simple logic. So it will be useful for simple cases. If it is more complicated, then you may want to use the traditional if-else approach. So nothing wrong with the if approach. It's just a different way to do things, right? So it's up to you as a developer to choose which one to use to make the code more readable and more robust and easier to maintain. All right, so that's array spread. Next would be spreading in objects, which in my opinion is even easier to understand sometimes. But let's try that. So let's say you have you have 2 objects. Object 1, right, and object 2, and then each of them would be right. Each of them would have different properties. Like for example, there's foo. So foo and bar is like a convention to mean something random, arbitrary things, make up names. So foo bar, and then x42, for example. So 2 properties in object 1. And then in object 2, we have a bar, which has value of bas. I think that is how it is pronounced. So foo, bar, and bas. So typically, those are very typical ways to name random things. Okay, so two objects with different properties, right? So you can merge the two objects and make a new object that contains all the properties of the two objects by using object spread. So what I mean is that if I have, if I do a merged, I can do like spread object 1 and then object 2. So this will basically spread object 1, which will give you the two properties here, similar to the array concept, except this is an object. And then spread object 2 will give this 2. So the end result will be a new object having 4 properties. Let's see. Right, so as you can see, it has all the 4 properties, which is a union of the two objects. So that is the most basic object spread operation. So an interesting thing would be when you have property key that have the same name, basically a clash in property key. Then what happens? So let me show you. Right? So assuming I have foo bar as usual, x42 as usual, but object 2, I have the same property key foo with another value, right? And then I have y13 here, right? So if I merge these two objects, how many properties would you expect in the new object? Can someone tell me? So I have 2 here, I have 2 here. They both have a foo and then x and y. So how many properties would appear in the merged object? Can someone tell me? Anyone? I can give you a hint, it would be less than 100. So how many properties in merged? So I have 2 properties, right, in object 1, foo and x, object 2, foo and y, and then I use this object spread operation to spread the 2 objects to make a new merged object. So how many properties will we have in the merged object? Any idea? How about Yi? What do you think?
I guess 3.
Why?
It will have foo, then it will have x and y. Since foo
Excellent.
is the same, so
Yeah.
it's only display once.
Excellent. Yeah, you're right. So what do you think would be the value for foo? Would that be bar or bars?
I think it's bar since it's in object 1, but I'm not sure.
So excellent. Thank you, Yi. So the interesting question would be which value would win, right? Since we are merging the two objects, they happen to have duplicated key names. And as Yi mentioned, there will only be 3 resultant properties, right? Because foo can only appear once. So it must pick from one of them. So it turns out that the last one wins. So this one wins. It's always the last one. The last one in here, like last one, right? And let's verify that. So merged class, right? So it is coming from object 2. So this is one rule to keep in mind when you have duplicated key names. When you're merging two objects, the last one wins. And the same goes for more object. If you have object 1, object 2, and object 3, they all have the foo property, for example. And then when you merge them in order, object 1, 2, and 3, then object 3 will win. Right? So the last is always the last one that wins. That is just the convention. Nothing fancy, just the convention. It has to make up some rule, right? When you have collision of names. collision of key names. So yeah, so that is merging. Yeah, merging objects. So just very quickly, one thing to just quickly mention, you may, when you come across, especially older code, you may come across something called object.assign. So this is basically the pre-ES6 way to do the same thing. Pre-ES6 way. So to be honest, I do not use that anymore, but I just want to bring it up so that if you see that, at least you will know. I'm not going to go into the details of the syntax because that may be too confusing to talk about too many things at one time. But just keep in mind, object assign is the same as object spread. Well, not the same, but very similar. You can use object assign to merge objects, similar to this one. They are not identical, but subtle differences, but similar. All right, so that is object spread. And okay, so the next one is, in my opinion, a little harder to understand. REST parameters, right? So this is very useful when you have. Okay, let me give you one example. Let's say I have a function using the old way, my func, and then this function would take. It cares about the first two arguments, A and B. And then I can have any number of arguments. It's not fixed. So I can do like this. So very usual, as a common practice, very often you will see people use the variable name rest for the rest parameter because it is a rest parameter. But you can actually name that anything. You can name it foo, you can name it bar, you can name it anything. But usually people may like to use the rest for the name of the rest parameter. So why would you do that, right? So you may do that when you do not know how many items in here in advance. It is dynamic, right? Or when you don't really care about this one. Well, you don't really care about each entry in this rest parameter. You care most about the first two. So those are some scenarios where you may want to use the rest. So for example, right? For example, if I want to like, I care about A, I want to print that out. I want to print out B. And for the last one, I just want to print the whole thing as one entry, right? So if I do this, A, B, 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 right? Then it will print out A and B because those are the two one-to-one mapping, right? A would be printed out, B would be printed out. And then the rest parameter would be an array that will contain C, D, E, F, right? So the rest, because the first two are already taken, so it will handle the rest, right? So A and B will correspond to the first two entries in here. And then the rest parameter here would correspond to the rest. That's why the third one here would print out an array, is an actual array that has four entries. So that is the rest. Yeah, it may be a little hard to appreciate why this is useful. But for now, I guess you just keep that in mind. Make sure you understand how it works. And over time, when you see more and more code and when you do more development, you will come across that again, and you will start to appreciate that even more. So that's the rest parameter. So the last, okay, so I think that's all the spread operation I want to talk about today. So before I jump on to destructuring, is there any question or any comment? All right, so destructuring. So destructuring is another very useful, powerful feature, new syntax. So so let me think about an example here. Okay, so let's say I have an array here. So I'm going to talk about destructuring array, right? The structuring arrays. So I have an array with 2 strings, 1 and 2, right? And then if I use destructuring would be like this. I would make a constant and then assign from the full array. And in that constant, I would have, I'm thinking about the names, just A, B, C, D, maybe, A and B. So if I have A and B, if I do something like this, what happens would be, it will map each entry in the full array into each entry in this array. So this is like an array, right? And if I assign an array to something like an array, it will be a one-to-one assignment. So then if I do A, it print 1 because A would have A correspond to the first entry in the full array, which is 1, and B would be 2. So that is destructuring array. So if it is not one-to-one, okay, let's say I have a C here. What do you think C will contain? Does anyone know? So A and B would be maybe 1 and 2, right? But if I have a C, so it's not one-to-one. I have a 3-entry array here. I have a 2-entry array here. So what do you think the value would be in C? Or would that be any syntax error? Would that throw an error? Can I even do this?
It will be empty.
Empty? What do you mean by empty?
An empty array.
Yeah, empty array. So C
Yes.
would be empty array. Okay, so it's correct that you think it is empty, but in terms of an empty array, C would be undefined. Right? Remember, in JavaScript we have the notion of undefined and null. They are similar but different. In this case, there's really nothing to assign to C, right? Because there are only 2 entries in the source array here. So if I run this, A will still be 1 because it corresponds to the first entry in the source array full. B would be 2, C would be undefined because there's nothing I can assign to C, right? So you're right. I mean, in the sense that it is empty, nothing. Yeah, so that is array destructuring. Which is, I think, a little less commonly used, at least from my experience. But destructuring objects are very, very commonly used. So let me talk about that next. So destructuring objects, right? So if I make an object user to describe a user in a system, right? Then I will have an ID, just a number, 42, for example. And then I may have a flag to indicate if this user has been verified. It's not a bot, it's a real human. So sometimes when you sign up for some account, it may send you an activation email that you have to click to verify if this is a valid email, something like that. And when that is confirmed, the system may update this flag to say it is a verified valid user, right? So if I want to get information, so let's say I want to print out the ID of the user and whether it is verified. So I need to retrieve, right? So of course you can do like user.id, and you can do user.is verified. It will definitely work. 42 and true, right? So this is how you can access object property value, right? However, there is a easier way, because imagine you have many properties in the user object and you have to reference some of them. You will have to do this many times, right? So this works, but it may not be the cleanest way to do it, right? So another way to do that is to destructure the object. So similar to destructuring an array, but this time, since it is an object, right? I do this object curly braces, and then like this. So I can now specify the property I want to retrieve from the source object. ID is verified. So if I do this, the ID constant will contain the value of the ID from the user object, which is 42. So that means if I console log, or actually I don't need to console log. Let me just run this. If I run this and then I do ID is 42, right? Is verified to be true. So this is the structuring objects. So if I have many more properties, right? Email, food@bar.com, and then what else? Name, no name, and so on, right? I have a huge object here with many properties. If I just care about some of the items, right, I can do this, right? Then this way, I can ignore the rest and just get the ones that I want, right? So this is like selecting properties from an object that you care about in this portion of the code. So yeah, destructuring objects are used all the time. Very powerful, very useful. And one more thing I want to talk about is renaming. So sometimes you may want to rename the structured properties, because sometimes there may be a name clash in your code. It doesn't allow duplicated names. So for example, if I want to rename ID and is verified, I can just do like this, new ID, and then colon here, new is verified. So that means I am still destructuring the user object and retrieve only the ID and is verified properties from this object, ignore the rest. But at the same time, I would rename the, I would name the variable that contains the ID value as new ID. And similar for is verified, it would be renamed to new is verified. So if I run this code, oops, oh, I'm debugging now. Okay. And then if I do ID, oh, I think I have to, okay, sorry. Let me refresh, run this again. ID is not defined. There is no ID, right? Because ID is a property name in user. So there is no ID, but there is new ID though. New ID is 42, new is verify is true, right? So you see what I mean? I'm here I'm picking the properties that I'm interested in and assign that to an other name different than the original key name in the object. So this is also quite commonly used because sometimes you may want to name the variable in a way that is more consistent with the code that you're writing. Sometimes there may be a name clash that you are forced to rename, otherwise it won't compile, something like that. So yeah, those are renaming when you are renaming as you are destructuring object. So a lot has been said. I don't want to make it too confused or bored. Just one last thing, real quick. Destructuring parameters, because that is also very useful. All right, so using the same object here, if I want to make a function to get user ID, right? So arrow function, same as before, I do this function body here. So the get user ID function, you can take the object as the input, and then you can return user.id. So if I try that, it prints 42. If I get user ID and pass the user object here, it will print 42. So another way to do the same thing is to use parameter destructuring, meaning instead of passing the entire object into this function, and for the purpose of retrieving just one piece of information, right? I can do, okay, let me go step by step. You can think about that as something like this. I pass the entire object, but then I do object destructuring, right? I do object destructuring to get the ID, and then I return the ID, right? I just do object destructuring. Let me try that and see if that works. Yeah, it still works, right? And then if I'm to simplify that further, you see that I'm getting ID from user, right? So I can actually just do this whole thing in here, right? So basically, I am destructuring the objects as parameter, like in here itself. I don't need extra line here to do the destructuring operation. I can destructure the parameter in the bracket here. So this is a very useful approach because in real life, you will easily have objects that are very huge, many properties, and then you will have functions that will care about only a subset of the object properties. So this will make it more clean in the sense that inside this function body, I know that I only need this. I only care about this property, right? So as opposed to passing the entire object and then pick and choose the ones. So it is just a cleaner way to do things. Just keep in mind though, don't have the illusion of if I pass object, I mean if I pass user here, so don't have the illusion that it is bigger because this is an object with many properties. It's not bigger. It's just a reference. Even if I pass user, user is just a reference to this huge object here. So it is not a matter of passing more or less data, bigger or smaller. It's not like that. It is just a cleaner way to express what you need so that you know that this function will just use these properties from the object. So just cleaner. Like if I do get email, for example, get name, right? Then you can do a similar thing here. You can destructure name, and then you just return the name. Implicit return, right? We talked about last time. You can do this as well. So if I try that out, get name, user, you will pass, you will send, you will return the name of the user, right? So yeah, so that is destructuring parameters, very useful, and it will make your code more readable and more clean. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything on the talk today. Yeah, I hope that helps. Any questions? Any comments? Let me move this over. I hope that's not too hard to understand. It's just syntax, right? In my experience, initially I was a little confused by spread and destructure. I don't even know the difference between the two. They are so similar. Took me some time to learn the new syntax and get familiarized through more and more coding, more practice. Then it becomes very natural. Yeah, but those are the like the recommended approach to do things nowadays, right? So anything? Yeah, anything from you, Yuki?
Yeah, I think it will be very useful for these functions that we are going to use when we combine HTML, CSS together. When you pass parameters, like yeah. You see I think next few videos.
Next time we talk about DOM. It will be interesting because when we talk about DOM, you will build the connection between what we have learned so far to do actual things in a web page. Yeah, that would also be a good foundational concept before we learn things like React, JS, and so on. So DOM is a very important concept. Yeah, I think this is the last lesson on JavaScript itself. No, I think maybe there are a few more, but next time we'll talk about DOM and then DOM event, and then we will wrap up by talking about a few things in JavaScript.
We will have more tools to do more things.
Yeah. So yeah, I hope that helps, and I hope you find that interesting. And I hope you don't find this line 14 here too weird. It is actually a natural way to do things, but just take some practice combining implicit return with destructuring parameters. So just do more practice, and then you'll be natural. All right.
Thank you, Homan.
So as usual, if you have any questions, send me a message or bring that to the class next time. Otherwise, I will see you next week, and take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much for today. Thank you.
Thank you, teacher. Thank you, teacher.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye-bye.